Here we are now in part 2 of the heart, page 661, and we've been looking at the wall here of the heart, and we've noticed that we have the endocardium right here, okay, which is the endothelium plus connective tissue. We have the myocardium, which is the cardiac muscle. We have the next layer here, which is a loose connective tissue overlain with the visceral pericardium. We have this, what's referred to as a pericardial cavity or sac, which we must identify as a potential space. Okay, it has a little bit of serous fluid to moisten the surface, but is otherwise not supposed to be an open space at all. Okay, it has clinical importance in terms, if it does have space in it, that means there's pericarditis going on. The next thing that we come to as a tissue here then is the parietal layer of the pericardium, and then the parietal layer again is a simple squamous epithelium. It's very thin, simple squamous epithelium. Then out here we have something that is a fibrous connective tissue. It is going to be dense, irregular connective tissue from our connective tissue proper, which means that we're going to have collagen bundles that are sort of woven into a fabric by fibroblasts in creating this very strong fibrous connective tissue here. If we were to combine that with this layer of pericardium, the parietal pericardium, then together we would refer to that as the fibrous pericardium. Okay, so I've sort of reoriented things here. There's two actual things going on here. There's the parietal pericardium, there's a layer of dense irregular connective tissue, and then taken together, only taken together, that is the fibrous pericardium. That's the way UC and University of Texas, etc. would like us to learn this and have it in our minds so that we can talk together about it. Okay? So that's our situation with that. Here is our overview of the heart. If you were to be in a store like the nearby 99 Ranch store, the butchers there would supply pork hearts, which actually, if they're a little bit lazy and they don't cut away the great vessels up here, looks almost identical to a human heart. Okay, so if you want to study the heart, that's a good way to do it. Here we have now the artistic rendition of the human heart. It's the big overview. It's the external view, and so it's good to understand it from this perspective. I said that the heart was lying on its right side, so here they've tipped it up just a little bit so that we can see this is the right ventricle on the outside from the outer view. This is the left ventricle from the outer view. We have the aorta here. Sometimes blood vessels can be used to define what's going on. So for instance, we have the two first branches of the aortic arch. Here is the right coronary artery, and it's going through an anatomical landmark right here. Try not to get the glare from the light above here. The idea here is that we have two things going on. This is a groove that it's residing in, and I think I've written it right here. The atrioventricular sulcus or groove that the artery, the right coronary artery, is residing in, which is to say that this is the atrium, atrio, this is the ventricle, ventricular, so atrioventricular sulcus. It's a little landmark, and that means that this artery can supply blood to the wall that separates the atrium from the ventricle. So we have that little strategy in mind in terms of position here. We have the left coronary artery that's emerging here from behind this, as you can see, pulmonary trunk. This is the most anterior aspect here. The aorta is a little bit behind. Okay, so the left coronary emerges right here, and it almost immediately divides, in this case, into the circumflex artery, which is also going to travel this way and meet up on the backside with the right coronary. And it's traveling in the atrioventricular sulcus. Here we have the other branch, which is the anterior interventricular. Okay, so it is the, where is that described? Right here, anterior interventricular artery. Where it's going is actually down the wall between the left ventricle and the right ventricle, and it's serving that wall, the tissue of that wall, as well as the outer walls here. But there is an interior wall dividing the two ventricles, which need blood supply. Okay, we have these little bright red vessels here are pulmonary veins. We normally think of veins as being oxygen poor, but since it's coming back pulmonary from the lungs, it's got fresh oxygen. So by definition, a vein is carrying blood toward the heart, and by definition, an artery is carrying blood away from the origin of the heart. Okay, so this is the big overview that we need to know. Right here we have a blood supply return from the head, shoulders, upper extremity, and this is the superior vena cava, okay, written this way. And then we have the inferior vena cava coming from the abdominal region, the lower extremities, and so on, all collecting the blood of that part of the body. So the inferior vena cava. Here we have this big, as before mentioned, pulmonary trunk that's taking blood out to the left and to the right lung. This is a special thing that we need to think about at the moment of birth. Those of you that are attuned to the moment of birth, we go from being a fetus which obtains nutrients and oxygen from the placenta to then an independent organism once birth takes place and the placenta is no longer feeding us. Back before we needed to breathe, we had oxygen coming from the placenta, and so instead of sending blood to the lungs, we actually had a blood vessel that bypassed the lungs here. We'll talk about that more when we compare the fetus to the neonate, newborn baby. Now this vestigial little organ right here is called the ligamentum arteriosum, but it was the ductus arteriosum during the period of fetal development, so we could skip going to the lungs. Okay. Then looking also at the external view of the heart from the outside, we have this view, and we're looking at the back of the heart now. So you might recall that we had the atrioventricular groove right here, and we had the right coronary artery traveling in it, and we had the circumflex branch right here of the left coronary artery also traveling in that atrioventricular groove that surrounds the heart, and they actually meet up right here. Do you see that? Okay, so there is what we call an anastomosis, spelled this way, an anastomosis, which means that two arteries are running together into each other, and in this case they're forming the posterior interventricular artery. One last detail back here is that we have something right here called the coronary sinus, which is collecting virtually almost all the venous blood from the heart and is going to send that blood to the right atrium, okay, to get pumped to the lungs.